thank you for coming out tonight. We have a really special presentation. We're really happy to have Tim Lake, who many of you may know from NBC 10. He's used to be a news anchor, and actually when you first reached out, I was kind of not sure if that was like an impersonation or something, but it is in fact the real deal. Tim has written and recently published a book on the Bergdoll Boys, particularly Grover Bergdoll, who is infamous for his draft dodging, but also for his role in early aviation history. And as many of you know and remember, there was the Bergdoll mansion and estate over on Westchester Pike. So thank you all for coming out. I'm going to turn it over to Tim, and let's enjoy.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And thank you all for coming. I truly, truly appreciate it. You know, this story has such great roots of history in this township. It's just incredible. And whenever I drive past Westchester Pike above Lawrence Road, it's just amazing how much it's changed. And I know that many of you have seen that change in your short lives compared to the long time frame of the Bergdolls. Let me start by introducing a special guest that I've asked to come here tonight. And you'll recognize the name right away. This is Louis Irwin Bergdoll. Lou, would you stand up, please? Lou. Lou is the son of Irwin Bergdoll, one of the four brothers. And please save your questions to the end, because I still question him about his father goes back to the 1890s when he was born. So how in the world is Lou so young, healthy looking, and still going vibrant, and still alive and with us today? So at the end of our presentation, which will take probably just under an hour, we'll open it up to questions and answers and have Lou join us for that as well. And hopefully we can all answer your questions. But Lou has been a tremendous help to me in putting this book together.
He's exaggerating.
It's been a long slog, and he can tell you that I contacted him and a cousin of his, a couple of cousins of his on a regular basis. He's been absolutely tremendous and cooperative on getting this story out there. And I think this book, there have been a couple of others in the past. I think this book has advanced the story a little bit from the story that's been told over and over about the Bergdolls. So please save your questions to the end, and we'll have Lou join us to answer them here. Here's the cover of the book, and hopefully all of our technology will cooperate with us. You know, I have several photographs here, some that Lou has contributed from members of his family. It was published last fall by a publisher that's located in Havertown and also Oxford, England. And it's available for anyone who wants it. Now I have to warn you, it's a long slog. There's a lot in here. It's not one of the thin little books that tells a quick story and then moves on, because this story spans from the 1840s all the way up to the 1970s. And as you know from your knowledge of history in this area, a lot went on in that time. I'm not sure where I've got to. Am I too far away, Jay, from this to advance photos from up here? No. Or is something blocking it, maybe? I'm curious, how many people have seen the story come out recently, the new version of the story come out recently, and maybe have gotten the book or heard about the book? No one yet? Okay. And you heard about it through the promotion from the Marple Historical Society, then, I presume, correct? Okay. So.
Okay, you may just have to tell me when to advance.
Yeah, I wonder if it's the distance that I'm away, or wherever the receiver is, it's not advancing it. Okay, I can tell you then when to advance it. All right, let's get started. You saw the cover of the book. This is the Bergdoll Brewery that was established in the 1840s, earlier than 1849 actually, this building. It was in Brewery Town in Philadelphia. And the Bergdolls, of course, were German Americans who knew all about how to brew beer. And along with many other German-American families, they started a brewery. And it was a thirsty city in Philadelphia back then, obviously, because they were very successful with their brewery. And believe it or not, many parts of the Bergdoll Brewery building still remain today. They've been restored into offices and condominiums. Some have been torn down over the years, but they make up a prominent part of the brewery town section of Philadelphia. Please advance. Here's a better picture of the brewery. You can see the big barrels of beer that were down here along the railroad tracks ready for loaning. The building in the center is today an office building. The building on the right side is still there today. It's made into condominiums. Unfortunately, where it says on the top left, the Louis Bergdoll malting house suffered an explosion and fire in the late 1800s, killing one of the Bergdoll's sons, and is no longer there.
Where did you say this was located?
In the brewery town neighborhood of Philadelphia.
Where would that be?
That would be across the river across the Schuylkill River from Fairmount Park, just upstream. And the next picture, if you advance, please, you get an idea where it is.
29th and Girard, essentially.
There you go, yes. So here's the Philadelphia Museum of Art when it was under construction in the 20s. And if you were to look in the upper top left-hand corner, you can see a smokestack. That's about where the brewery was located. So it's not far from the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Advance, please. Here's a closer look at that. That is the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad on the bottom left. The Schuylkill River would be just off the frame on the bottom left, and you can see the large buildings that I've marked with the red. Those were the brewery buildings, but after it had already, kind of ceased to exist. Next photo, please. This is Emma Bergdoll. She was the matriarch of the Bergdoll family who came here from Germany and began working for the Bergdoll family as a house servant. And the family lore has it that she met the son of old man Bergdoll, Louis Bergdoll, the older, the founder of the brewery, and they fell in love, and against the family's wishes, they eventually married and had the children who are the subject of the Bergdoll Boys. Next photo, please. Next is Louis Bergdoll. There are several Louis Bergdolls, one with us tonight. So, Louis Bergdoll the elder, Louis Bergdoll the son, were the two who founded and worked the brewery for many, many years. They both died in the 1890s within a few years of each other. This is Louis Bergdoll, their son. Because their middle names were all different, they were not truly senior, junior, the third, what have you, as we would expect today. Next photo, please. Then we have Charles Bergdoll, the next son. Very distinguished looking gentleman as well. Next photo, please. Then we have Erwin Bergdoll. He was the infamous race car driver.
What was his first name?
Erwin.
Oh.
This man right here with the race car goggles on is Lou Bergdoll's father. Born in the 1890s and was a racing champion. He was the equivalent back then of today's Dale Earnhardt's or some of the famous stock car, race car drivers that we have on the circuit today. He was, just an incredible daredevil in a race car. And he raced in the Philadelphia Fairmount Park races. And on his fourth try, he won the race, and he was an absolute champion. You can advance the picture, please. And this is the renowned Grover Bergdoll. This is the man you probably have heard so much about. And in part because he spent a lot of time trying to live up to his older brothers. He was the youngest of the sons. He was always trying to live up to his oldest brothers, whether they were in aviation or race cars, and he got into a lot of trouble as a result. He would race all over Delaware County, the main line. He would get speeding tickets. He would thumb his nose at the judges, at the police officers, and this is what initially made the infamous name for the Bergdoll family. Advance, please. This is the Bergdoll brothers' sister. There was only one sister in the family, and the brothers greatly overshadowed their sister tremendously. An interesting story about her is that she married a man by the name of Hall, who also was engaged in racing, and because he violated the rules during practice one day and got in on a little altercation with the public and the police. She decided that from that point on, she was going to ride with him while he was practicing in his races around Fairmont Park. So she was very daring. She reportedly, although there's really no way to prove this, but she reportedly was the first woman to be driving her own large, luxurious sedan in Philadelphia. This would have been about 1906 or 1907 when her older brother Louis bought her a really, really nice car. Let's advance, please. Race cars. You're going to hear a lot about the Bergdolls and the race cars in the book. This is a car that Erwin Bergdoll, Lou's father, built out of parts from the Bergdoll Motor Company that were left over, engines, chassis, frames, what have you, wheels. And the location for this is on Westchester Pike, just west of the interchange with the Blue Route. You'll see in some later photographs and maps, the front of this building, which faces out like that, was literally, Westchester Pike would have been right about here. This building is long gone, but I do have some photographs that we'll see later that show aerial pictures of this building later on. Now, Erwin was a very accomplished machinist, and he built this car. In fact, he built several of them. They would put them on trains and take them to races all over the country, to Indianapolis, Daytona, Savannah, Georgia, Long Island, New York, and some of the famous race spots up there. And in fact, they would take several race cars with them, always trying to win the next race and become the next champion. Advance, please, Jay. Here's a picture of one of the races in Fairmont Park, for example, and you see number 8 right up there. That was Erwin Bergdoll's race car. Now, this is in one of the races prior, I believe it's prior to the one he won in 1911. And then if you look over, it's difficult to see, and I wish I had a pointer, but if you look over here, you see a little space on the right-hand side between 9 and 11. That would have been race car number 10. That would have been Grover Bergdoll's position, but he had some trouble with his race car in that particular year that this photo was taken, and he had to drop out at the last minute. Advance, please. Oh, and again, this is Fairmont Park. Many people don't realize, for 4 years in a row, there were these speed races all the way around Fairmont Park. Just incredible. I never would have imagined that. This is a picture in 1911 of Erwin Bergdoll winning and setting the record for the race time in Fairmont Park. Now back then, for these particular races, they didn't all send everybody off together where they could crash and smash up and everything, because it was very dangerous for racing among them. They would send them off at intervals, and then timers would set their time as they came around the track each time. The person with the best course or best lap time, all collective, won the race. Erwin Bergdoll set the race for the fastest lap, the fastest race. There were 2 or 3 other ones that he set the record for. And the record still stands, because after 1911, the Fairmont Park Commissioner said, we can't do this anymore. This is too much. Now, it wasn't because of the crowds of 300,000 and 400,000 people who would gather to watch these races, or it wasn't because the races generated anywhere from $15,000 to $30,000 a year to fund hospitals and charities and things like that. It wasn't because of the publicity that it brought to the city of Philadelphia. It was because of the Fairmont Park Commission bylaws that said private entities cannot use the park to make money no matter what it's for. So they were simply going by the old bylaws of the Fairmont Park Commission that dated back to the mid-1800s. They canceled the race, and then of course, as you know, other venues all around the country became popular for their races. Advance, please. Yes. And here he is. Now, if you take a close look at Lou right here in the front row, you see the resemblance. That's a beautiful picture, isn't it? A big smile. He had just won the race, and they raised him up on the shoulders of all the men, and you can see they adore him. Mostly men there who are race fans, as they are today, but they absolutely adore him. He was a record setter. I think that's a great photograph. Advance, please. All right, so now we go on to Louis Bergdoll, the oldest of the sons, and So keep in mind when grandfather died in 1894, father died in 1896, at the age, I might say, of 39, very young. The money from the brewery kind of fell into, you know, the next generation of the family. Emma, their mother, was the matriarch, and then the sons were just coming to age. They gained their inheritance, and they started businesses, they educated themselves. Louis Bergdoll started a motor car company where he developed Bergdoll motor cars, and then he got the aviation bug at the turn of the century. Wealthy men at this time caught the aviation bug, and they would either buy their own airplanes, or they would buy airplanes and have pilots fly them in races. And you know, it was what wealthy men did then, as we see wealthy men and women doing today with their excess money. So he bought, let's see, Rodman Wanamaker, who was the son of the John Wanamaker of the department store fame, ordered this airplane from the French. It's called a Blériot, and it was the first one to fly across the English Channel. And he had this plane shipped over in a crate to Philadelphia. He put it back together and displayed it in Wanamaker's department store in Center City, Philadelphia, hung it up in the ceiling, and it was a major hit for the Christmas season of that year. Everybody came to see it. Lou Bergdoll got the bug and decided to buy the plane for $5,000. The only trouble was, he was never a pilot. He didn't know how to fly a plane. He was very well connected with aviation, having started and helping start the Aero Club of Pennsylvania, which eventually became, of Philadelphia, which eventually became the Aero Club of Pennsylvania. But he never flew, so he would pay other men to fly his airplanes. He shipped this plane around the country, flew it in various races, and then he stuffed it in the rafters of a garage over here on Westchester Pike, where it sat until the 1960s. And I'll tell you in a bit what happened to the plane after that. Advance, please. Bergdoll automobiles. In the early part of the century, everybody was trying to get on the automobile bandwagon. Bergdoll was, in a way, competing with the big names like Chevrolet, Buick, Ford, what have you. But of course, the competition was fierce, and in the end, they lost out. But look at the cars. They would buy the parts. They would buy engines from Westinghouse in Pittsburgh, and the frames would be shipped in, the radiators, steering wheels, everything would be shipped in, and they would assemble them on Spring Garden Street in Center City, Philadelphia, in a building which is still there today. It's condominiums today. It's a beautiful brick building. And they sold them for a few years. They sold them with a dealership in Washington, Trenton, New Jersey, but it just didn't work out. I think because Lewis didn't really pay a lot of attention to the business. He was off racing. He was in Florida, Savannah, Georgia, Long Island, New York. He was in Chicago. He went to the West Coast for some races, and probably wasn't truly minding the business. Eventually, it went under, and as you know, other car companies took over. Change the picture, please. This was Louis Bergdoll's mansion in between Brewery Town and the Museum District in Philadelphia. This building still stands today. It's an absolutely magnificent Italianate building that's now split up into half a dozen apartments or so. Emma Bergdoll, you saw the picture of the matriarch in the beginning, bought each of her children a mansion. This was the first one she bought for Louis. And he owned this, and his two children, two sons, owned this into the 1980s. And then it eventually was sold out of the family. But what just a magnificent mansion.
What was it made of?
This is brownstone.
Wow.
Yeah, it's all stone. Just an absolutely beautiful mansion. And if you go online today and search for the Bergdoll Mansion on Green Street, in Philadelphia, you'll see various pictures pop up, inside, outside. You know, modern pictures where realtors have posted the pictures.
We looked at an apartment inside.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful building. And then there's
enough light.
out behind it is the big carriage house. He had a carriage house out there with an elevator to lift his cars up to the top. Next photo, please. Oh, this is the building where the cars were made, the Louis J. Bergdoll Motor Company. This is now a condominium building on Spring Garden Street in Center City, Philadelphia. Still in great condition today. It's all been restored. Next photo, please. This is Grover Bergdoll. As I said, he became the most notorious, I'm sorry, I keep moving out of your frames, because he was trying to live up to his brother's fame and fortune and you know, their racing and their airplanes, and so he sort of felt entitled. He was wealthy. He didn't have to answer to anyone. His father was dead. His mother was busy trying to run the business and didn't really understand all the inner workings of business, and the kids, especially Grover, kind of did whatever they wanted to. So this was one of his first cars. You can see there he's maybe 16. This might have been his first car, which was a Lozier. So he became notorious and infamous for speeding tickets on the main line, shootouts with the local police in Ardmore and out here in Delaware County. There's one story where he was speeding up Lancaster Avenue, and the police in Ardmore, Lower Merion police, were chasing him, and they got into a shootout and they chased him all the way out to the farm here on Westchester Pike. And when they got there, they later discovered there were several bullet holes in the back of the car. And it's an example of how he was just daring. He and some friends of his were just absolutely daring and would get into shootouts with the police, and he rarely had to answer for it, except after a while, before he got into trouble with his draft dodging. He did go to jail in Norristown, the Montgomery County Jail, for almost 3 months. Next photo, please. So this picture was also taken at the farm right here on Westchester Pike. The farm was on the north side of the road as you're going west. And although it looks, at first look you think, oh, he's in an airplane, he's going to fly. We'll take a close look at that. There's no motor. The wings have no airfoils. There's nothing that would ever make this airplane fly. So when I first saw this photo, I thought, oh, that's the early Blériot airplane of his brother's. It's not. This is an airplane that they made out of some parts that they got from their car company. And then Emma, the mother, believe it or not, the mother, who had been a seamstress in her very young years, sewed the wings out of some canvas for her boys so they could play around with an airplane. Now, can you imagine sewing canvas wings for your children and saying, go out and build yourself an airplane, without realizing what they were going to do? So they would pull this little device behind either horses or maybe a car or whatever, but it never got in the air. Next photo, please. This airplane, however, did get in the air. This was a Blériot that was first flown. The guy by the name of Louis Blériot, a Frenchman, flew this across the English Channel and shocked the world before the infamous aviator Lindbergh. Charles Lindbergh even flew across the Atlantic. So this is the Blériot that was shipped into Philadelphia by Rodman Wanamaker. Louis Bergdoll, Grover's older brother, purchased this, brought it out to the farm, and then he paid others to fly this airplane. This is Grover sitting in the airplane, but he's a kid. He didn't know how to fly. He never flew this airplane. Only later did he buy his own airplane from the Wright brothers, and that's the one he flew. This, by the way, was taken at the farm, I believe, right up here. Next photo, please. So, by the time Grover got to be about 18, he caught the aviation bug too. Keep in mind, at this time, people were setting records all over the country for flying their airplanes, speed records, elevation records, and Grover had missed his chance being around his older brothers all the time to set some records and gain some notoriety and fame through auto racing. So he decided, well, I like aviation. I want to fly an airplane. So he went out to Ohio, joined up with the Wright brothers, who were just starting the Wright School of Aviation. But they had a rule. If you want to buy one of our airplanes, which is the Wright B Flyer of 1911, you have to come out here and take a 6-week course on flying. So Grover went out there, he went through the course, and he actually became one of the best flyers, Orville Wright said, who ever had gone through his aviation school. This picture was taken just above what is today the Manoa Shopping Center, where Grover and his family built an airstrip called Eagle Field. Next photo, please. And this is Grover. Grover's actually on the left. The pilot would sit on the left as we're looking at it, and I'm not sure who was on the right. So he would fly off the field at Eagle Road and Westchester Pike, which is now the Manoa Shopping Center, and thousands of people would come out from the city and the farms and all around to come watch him fly. And this went on for 2 years. He would put on these demonstrations. Now you can see, it's difficult to see here how many there were, but you can see the crowd thickens over here, and then over on this side there would have been many more. But what an experience that must have been. This was, of course, all mostly farmland around here.
They still have skids.
They still have skids. Oh, yes. Well, there are wheels there, but there are also skids to stabilize it once it lands on the wheels. Next photo, please. This is a closer photograph, and I do know that that's Grover Bergdoll on the left in the pilot's seat. And the photograph indicates that it's Irwin on the right, but I've never been quite sure, Lou.
I'm a little shaky too.
Yeah, it's hard to say, but the photo was labeled as Irwin and his brother Grover, and you can see that Grover appears to be younger. Irwin's a few years older. But this gives you an example of, that's flying an airplane. That's pretty daring. And he made 748 flights without a mishap. Now some of them were a simple up and down, but he made that many flights without a mishap. Next photo, please. This is the hangar that they built right at Eagle Field, where the Manoa Shopping Center is today. And this is actually the Blériot that they also kept in the hangar. They kept Grover's Wright B Flyer and Lewis's Blériot in there for a while. Next photo, please. This is Grover's airplane, and there's a funny story that he was a bit vain. He wanted everybody to know who he was and what he was doing. He would always call the newspapers, I'm gonna fly, and come out and take my picture. And at one point he hired a man to come out and paint his name on the underside of the wing. And Lou helped me find this photo. It's just a wonderful photo because I really didn't believe it at first. Who would paint their name on the underside of the wing? So he was kind of, I'm not sure how to describe it, but on 2 occasions the painter was laying on his back under the wing painting, and Grover would run up and jump on the plane and just crank it up and take off while the guy was there in mid-brush. He did that twice, and the guy said, if you do that again, I'm out of here. Halfway through, the name being finished. So you can see the name was finished, and then he would fly all over the main line, all over Philadelphia. He'd circle Billy Penn at Philadelphia City Hall. He would dive bomb over the Devon Horse Show and scare the horses and all the people. And, he was really a menace. and keep in mind, there were no other airplanes in the air at this time. There was nothing. He would race the trains from Villanova all the way down to the city limits, and then turn around and go back and then beat the same train again. He was so fast. It was just such a spectacle. Next photo, please. All right, Lou, I'm sorry. This is Lou's dad. So along came the end of the aviation business, and Grover, the story goes that Grover was trying to gain more fame. So in 1913, he packed his Wright B airplane in the shop, the barn over here, and walked away. And through the next couple of years, he went back into racing, and then along came the World War in Europe, which was called the Great War in Europe. And then, of course, the United States got involved, and they reinstituted the draft, which had not been in place since the Civil War, when a wealthy person could pay $300 to have someone else go fight for him. When the draft was reinstituted in World War I, there's a lot of complicated issues here, but the Bergdolls were drafted. Both Irwin and Grover were drafted. Their numbers were called. They got high numbers in the 2000s. So both of them thought, well, there's a little bit of time before I actually get called. Well, all of a sudden, bam, both Bergdolls are, I believe, pushed up on the list. And part of that was because at the time, draft officials were appointed by politicians. They were local officials. They weren't government officials. In fact, the draft official who drafted Grover Bergdoll was also the editor of one of the best-selling newspapers in Philadelphia. So there was a bit of a conflict of interest there. He also had a conflict with Grover Bergdoll because he lived in the same neighborhood, and Grover had kind of gotten after his children when they broke a cherry tree, and so there's a lot of conflict going on. At any rate, the Bergdoll brothers are drafted, so instead of reporting, they decide, we're not going to report. They had the funds, they had the will, they felt like they were being persecuted instead of drafted, they were trying to get out of it for whatever reason, and this is going to be debated till the end of time. So they decided to move on. So they ran off into the mountains of West Virginia and Maryland, and this went on for a couple of years. They hid out in a tent, they stayed in a hotel in Hagerstown, Maryland. The federal government, the local police were all hunting for them, went on for a couple of years. Finally, they captured Grover. Irwin was still on the run. Later, he turned himself in. So things went quite well, considering for Irwin. He turned himself in, he was tried, he served some time out in Leavenworth, he came back home, and then, became a law-abiding citizen again. Grover, not so much. Please advance to the next photo. Yeah, okay, so here's a picture of the tent that they set up on Antietam Creek in the mountains of Maryland, and they lived there on and off for a couple of years. They would live in the tent, they would stay in a hotel, and they would come back to their country estate here on Westchester Pike, to the Bergdoll mansions in Winfield and the Brewery Town section of Philadelphia, all the while, and everybody was always hunting for them. Next photo, please. So, I need to back up a little bit. This is the Bergdoll mansion in Philadelphia, and I said that Emma bought mansions for each of her children. This is the mansion she bought for Grover, and then she moved in with him. So it's not there today, but it was in the Winfield section of Philadelphia. And this is the location which was the subject of police and federal agents always surrounding it, trying to find Grover. So we'll see near the end of the presentation where I'll show more pictures of what's here along Westchester Pike, where Irwin also had his farm mansion, which was a beautiful old Victorian house that was the original Bergdoll home and property here along Westchester Pike. And then the daughter also had a mansion purchased for her, which is today the Settlement Music School on the west side of Fairmount Park. So that mansion is still there as well, but it is today the Settlement Music School West. You can see this elaborate carriage house out back, and we'll see more pictures of that later. Next photo, please. This is the back side of Grover Bergdoll's mansion, and this just shows you how elaborate it is. And this is the mansion from which he escaped. So Grover was hiding away out in Maryland and in the tent, in the hotel, and one night he came back home just before Christmas, and some of his friends ratted on him, and the federal agents came in and searched the mansion, and they found him hidden in a window box seat just above one of these large picture windows right above me. I think it was the one on the second floor. We'll see a picture of that in a moment. So he was arrested, he was taken away, he was taken up to New York City, he was put on trial, he was held on Governor's Island, which was an army base, and put on trial, and he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Next photo, please. There's a picture of his car. This is Grover's car with his carriage house out behind the mansion on Winfield Avenue. The photo, and in the top it says AD 1906, so that's when it was built. Next photo, please. Here's the window box where he was captured in January of 1920. He was hiding right behind these two pieces right here. and the top where the padding is on the seat lifts up, and he was hiding under a Navajo blanket under there when they found him. Next photo, please. So this is a picture of Grover in the center with a federal agent on the left and a police officer on the right, and they were taking him on the ferry across from, in New York City, across to Governor's Island to go to jail and stand trial. And if you notice, Grover was very, he was a photographer. He had state-of-the-art cameras at the time, and he was very savvy about having his photo taken. So if you look carefully, you can't really see any of his right hand and the federal agent's left hand. And there's a reason for that. He's covering up his handcuffs. Let everybody see his handcuffs. Next photo, please. This is the, okay, I've got to set this up a little bit. So Grover goes on trial, and he's convicted, and he's sentenced to prison. This is where the story gets amazing. Somehow from prison, because he and Emma, the family, had the money to pay for it, they had all kinds of lawyers who were connected with politicians in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Washington, and they somehow paid these politicians and lawyers to convince Army officials and even some cabinet members from the president's cabinet in Washington to let him out of jail long enough to go hunt for a big cache of gold that he had hidden in the mountains in Maryland. Now, if anybody told you that story today, there's no way. So he gets out of jail, and he rides on the train with two Army guards, on the train down to Philadelphia. He's supposed to be going straight to Maryland to find his gold. He comes down to Philadelphia. Instead, he gets back into his mansion that we saw a minute ago, spends a couple of days there. He wines and dines the guards. They play pool. They go out to the burlesque shows. They get drunk, and then Grover manages to escape from his own mansion with his friend and his driver, Stecker, in this car. And then the story takes several different paths. Grover makes up a story about driving straight to the Treasury in Washington and taking a milk can full of gold out of the Treasury, which we later learned did not happen, but he made up the story and told it. Instead, what they did is they drove this car across the country to Pittsburgh, Indianapolis, Milwaukee, and then they end up on the Canadian border where they finagle their way across the Canadian border without this car, I might say, and they get themselves to Winnipeg, Manitoba, and then they manage to get Canadian passports and take the train across Canada, and then they get on a steamer and they take it to England and then across to Germany, where he spends the next 19 years as a fugitive in Germany. So it's just an incredibly wild story. Next photo, please. So he spends several years in Germany, and all the while he's being hunted by federal agents, army detectives, bounty hunters, you name it. Nobody can catch him. In a couple of cases, there are shootouts when he's in these small German towns. A woman gets shot in the hand. Another time, he walks into his hotel room, that his cousin owns a hotel where he's hiding out in Germany, and a couple of bounty hunters try to jump in and grab him. He ends up shooting them, killing one, severely wounding the other one, and escaping. Everybody's put on trial, and Grover gets off. And he continues. And later on, he ends up marrying a German woman, and this is his wife, Bergdoll Boys, and she's standing in front of a 1933 Hudson Essex terraplane that he had his brother Irwin, Lou's father, helped buy this terraplane here in Philadelphia and then ship it over to Germany, where he drove it over there. Next photo, please. This is a picture of Grover and his wife Berta. You can see she was several years younger than he was.
About now.
In that photo, he's probably 40 to early 40s.
So he's still in Germany.
He's still in Germany, yes. Next photo, please. Here's another picture of Berta, and this was not long after they were married. You can see how young she was. She had just turned 18, I believe, when they were married.
Wow.
Yeah. From Germany, they went off to Russia, where they got married. Next photo, please. Later on, after Grover, returned on his own to the United States. So He spent 19 years in Germany. While he was there, and this is where the story gets wilder, on 2 occasions, he got a fake passport, he crossed the ocean, got into Canada, and then on a train, came down from Canada into New York, Trenton, New Jersey, and back into Philadelphia. On one occasion, he spent just under a year hiding in that big mansion we saw a few minutes ago in the Winfield section of Philadelphia. The next time he came back in, he hid in that mansion for 3 years. All the while, his wife is with him, his kids are with him, and they're going back and forth to school, and they're sworn not to say anything. How he managed that is just unheard of. He would be in the upstairs windows looking down with binoculars that he kept in each window at the federal agents in their cars watching him. And there were, back then, the issue of gaining warrants through a judge were really gray. You couldn't serve a warrant after dark. You had to have absolute proof. The judges, the police officers were being paid off. Some were corrupt. So there were a lot of things in his favor that allowed him to hide in this mansion all that time while federal agents and local police were looking for him. So later on, you know, World War II is starting to pick up, and he determines that he'd better come home because staying in Germany as an American, as the Nazis are, you know, unfolding World War II, is no place to stay. They wanted the children to be American citizens, to be educated here. So he finally agrees to come back home. He gets on a ship, comes across, and federal agents learn this. So as he's on a ship coming across from Europe to the United States, there is a Senate hearing in Washington trying to revoke his citizenship so he can't land in the United States. The very next day, his lawyer, his wife, and his sister and a couple of his kids go to New York to greet his ship, which is coming into New York Harbor to unload him. Well, what they don't know is that federal agents get the Coast Guard and they go out in the ocean and meet the ship. They pull him off the ship and they take him directly into New York Harbor and put him back in prison at Governor's Island. He's tried again. Of course, he's found guilty. This time he's sentenced to prison. They take no chances. They send him back to Leavenworth for 5 years, but he served about 3 3/4 years. So while he's doing that, his wife, Berta, goes out to Chester County to escape the glare of the spotlight, buys a 240-acre farm, which this is the farmhouse, and tries to live quietly in Chester County. And it's not so easy because the public and the press, of course, are still hounding him. Next photo, please. This is a picture of Berta, and kind of in the center right, and the kids, and they have horses out there, and they have a couple of farmers who are paid to do the milking of the cows and raise some of the cattle and the other animals on the farm. Next photo, please. This is Berta with one of the children. So all this time, you know, the family is growing, and it's kind of amusing, and this involves Lou's father, Irwin. So for a time, when Grover was hiding in the mansion in Winfield, Irwin was staying there for a while. And there, you know, Irwin, there were several issues with him living out on the farm. He was a very sociable kind of guy. The farm out here on Westchester Pike was remote. He liked to hang out with his buddies in the city. So he spent some time living at the Winfield mansion when Grover and Grover's wife and children were there as well. Well, suddenly, Berta turns up pregnant. And they decide that she better leave and go back to Germany because Grover is supposed to be in Germany. And Irwin decides he better leave quickly too, lest anybody think that he was the father of the child. So everybody goes their separate ways. It's just one of the humorous things that took place as the family tried to figure out what to do because of this new revelation. I love that side of the story, by the way. Next photo, please. This is an aerial picture that shows Downingtown back probably in the late 1940s. And that's the Brandywine Creek that winds down around through there, and the railroad tracks and the bridge and kind of the mid-right. And then the remote farm that the Bergdolls owned out in Chester County, kind of in the top right. They were trying to escape the glare of the spotlight. In fact, Lou's father and Lou's mother did the same thing. They moved out to Honeybrook, which is in the far western part of Chester County, an effort for some privacy and to escape the public glare and all the press always banging on the doors. Next photo, please. Here's a picture of Grover and Stecker, his longtime companion, a few years older than him, but they were childhood friends from the brewery days in Philadelphia. Next photo, please. Here's Grover Bergdoll and a gun permit that he secured when he was living in Germany. He was a fugitive from the US, but they gave him a permit to have a gun, and he had several of them. Next photo, please. Here's a picture of Weinsberg, Germany, which was Berta's hometown. Grover met her there, and they both lived there for a while, and then moved on from there. But it shows the remote part of Baden in Germany, where they lived for a while. Next photo, please. This is a sour pistol that Grover kept, and he had several. As I said earlier, he got into a shootout, and a couple of bounty hunters tried to capture him, shot and killed the bounty hunter. But I've never been able to prove whether he used this sour pistol or a different pistol or not. But at any rate, this is his pistol that is still in the family possession today. Next photo, please. There's Grover in the front driving his vehicle. That's Stecker in the back. And then, in an effort with the State Department and the American Legion, a reporter for Hearst International magazine was sent over to Germany, and he's right there on the right-hand side. And his name was Leighton Blood, and he was sent over there to get a story, but to also try to convince Grover to give himself up. This went on many times. There were many, many routes taken to try to get Grover to give himself up, but in the end, he would not do it. He did finally come back on his own. Next photo, please. There's just a nice shot of Grover as a young man in his racing days. He was very handsome, and as a race car driver and pilot, the women loved him, the men envied him, so it added to his notoriety in the press. Next photo, please. The story was so popular that these syndicates for newspapers, somebody would put together this story, and this page, this was a full page of a newspaper, it would be like in your Sunday paper, and it would be in newspapers all over the US, and even printed in foreign languages in Europe, all the way in Australia. And it was like a serial. It was almost like a comic book page. But it told the whole story, the synopsis of the whole story of the Bergdolls. Next photo, please. Here's the family. This is Emma Bergdoll, the matriarch. That's Berta and the children. And in the later years, they were involved in Senate and congressional hearings, of course, and hiring attorneys and trying to get Grover allowed to come back home where he wouldn't face charges. It really wasn't successful, but they did spend a lot of money trying to do that. Next photo, please. Simply a picture of Grover. This was after he had already come home, had served his time in prison. Next photo, please. There's Emma in her older years. She lived until the 1940s.
Wow.
Next photo, please. Grover's fingerprints. The early days of fingerprints. He had them too. Next photo, please. You can go through the next 4 or 5 photos here as I talk about this. So this story, a lot of the information came together because there were so many legal cases. And in legal court cases, of course, there are depositions, there's court testimony, and everything is written down on paper. But you have to know where to look at them. I went to the National Archives in St. Louis, south of Washington, in New York City, all over Philadelphia, here in Chester County. Got some information from various groups here in Delaware County as well. And even I was able to get access to postcards that Grover would send to the family from Europe. That came about because at their farm in Chester County, they fled in the middle of the night, essentially. Not literally, but that phrase is used when people leave suddenly. Well, they left a lot of documents and photographs in the garage. And their neighboring farm friend, who was a friend of the kids, came by one day looking for the kids to play. Nobody was there. They had moved to Virginia. So at some subsequent date, he went into the garage and he found boxes of all these documents and photographs. This was in the 1940s. The family had left. He took the boxes of photographs and he kept them for decades.
Oh, my goodness.
And only many years later, he donated them to the Chester County History Center and the Downingtown Historical Society. So things like this, postcards that Grover had written to his wife, are available for research today. Next photo, please. There are a few of them here. And he sent these, well, that one's in German, so he sent them from Germany and other parts of Europe when he was hiding. Okay. You can keep going. Thank you. Legal documents galore. I mean, just all kinds of testimony and accusations and sworn statements and depositions, you name it. So that was very beneficial to do the research. Keep going, please. This was a document that was translated from German to English, and the stamp is put on it. Here is a picture of the original Bergdoll mansion in the brewery town section of Philadelphia. This is still standing today. It's in much better condition. It is today. This is on North 39th Street.
29th Street.
29th Street, yes, thank you. At Cambridge. Next photo, please. So in the 1940s, the Bergdolls had given up their mansion in Winfield. It was old, decrepit, it hadn't been maintained, it was dark and dreary and cold. And Berta wanted a new life. This is Grover's wife, wanted a new life. She moved out to Chester County in the farm, and they sold the house, but nobody would buy it because it was so run down. Finally, a demolition company bought it, and they agreed that the payment would be a certain amount, plus they would keep the woodwork on the inside, and the woodwork was absolutely beautiful. So this is in the stage of demolition. Where the man is standing in the upper window, he's standing on the window box where Grover Bergdoll is standing. And soon after this photo was taken, the building was completely demolished. It's no longer there. The 3.5 acre lot is now split up into 3 different houses. Next photo, please. Okay, we're finishing up on this segment. This is the Wright Brothers airplane in the museum, the Franklin Institute Museum in Philadelphia. Interesting story about this, because as Grover is hiding in Germany in the 1930s, this airplane is sitting in Erwin Bergdoll's machine shop, which is right here on Westchester Pike. You saw the race car in front of it. And it's mothballed, along with Erwin Bergdoll's championship Benz race car. So sometime around 1933, probably in the spring or summer of 1933, a man who had flown with Grover Bergdoll back in 1912 and 1911, came into the machine shop and took the airplane. He lived in Drexel Hill. He was a volunteer at the museum at the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia. And in 1933, they were organizing the Hall of Aviation, and they were trying to get the Wright brothers' kite that had flown at Kitty Hawk to be at the Hall of Aviation, to be the main display. Well, the Wright brothers were in a big dispute with the Smithsonian in Washington. The Kitty Hawk flyer was in London. So the Wright brothers didn't want to give it up to just anybody. So the museum in Philadelphia, the Franklin Institute, almost got the Wright brothers to agree to donate that airplane to the museum in Philadelphia. But at the last minute, the Smithsonian came in, they heard about the negotiations, and they said, we want it, we'll give you this and this and this, and we'll agree that the Wright brothers were absolutely the first to fly an airplane instead of what they had maintained for many, many years. So the Wright brothers, it was Orville only at that time, agreed that when he died, the Kitty Hawk flyer would go to the Smithsonian. So what does the Franklin Institute do? Suddenly they don't have a major display for their new Hall of Aviation. So their volunteer says something to the effect of, and I'm paraphrasing how this occurred. So he and another man who was funding the Hall of Aviation came up with the idea, well, Grover's airplane is sitting out there in shambles in Erwin's machine shop. The story has been presented by the museum for 90 years that Grover wrote them a letter and said, you can have my airplane. So the guys from the museum go out and get the airplane. They arrange to have it restored at the vocational school in Camden, New Jersey. They arranged to fly it again, just barely off the ground, the little hops, and then they crated it up, brought it back, and put it on display in the Franklin Institute. So as I'm doing my research, I started, with the Franklin Institute around 2017, saying, I'd love to see your records. They were very cooperative. I mean, they were absolutely wonderful. They have a stash of records, photographs, you name it, galore. And in there it says, Grover gave us his airplane in a written letter. I said, all right, I don't see the letter in here. Can I see the letter? 7 years later, they finally issued a statement that said, we don't have a letter. We probably never had a letter. The airplane was not given to us in a written agreement, it was an oral agreement. And that was their statement on the record. It just baffled me how they could do that. How they could determine that that was an oral gift from a man who was hiding in Germany, incommunicado with any American for fear that he would be captured, is beyond me. So to this day, that's still kind of an unknown situation. It puts the museum in kind of a ethical issue, maybe a legal issue.
Illegal.
I don't know. I don't know what'll become of it, but I've just presented the facts as they landed in my lap, and this is where we are. So it's still on display down there today, but the museum has said, you know, pretty distinctly that they have no record that the airplane was given to them in a written statement. Furthermore, the written statement they claimed was given to their volunteer, a man from Drexel Hill, and then he claimed he gave the airplane to the museum. So how, that even presents another ethical and legal issue. How can the museum accept one person's airplane from a third party without a written document conveying the possession? Is, even though this is in 1933. It's kind of a mystery. Next photo, please. This is the where they have the airplane hanging today. I took that picture a few years ago. It's a wonderful airplane, and the museum has been a great steward of the airplane. They've had it restored a few times. They've taken great care of it. They've put money into it. Others have been, invested money in its care. So they've been absolutely wonderful. But how they can change their story of 90 years without evidence of what they presented all these 90 years
No one's contested it.
just baffling me. Yes, no one's contested it. Next photo, please. All right, here is another issue that has come up because Erwin Bergdoll won the 1911 Fairmount Park motor race and was given a trophy. This is not it. This trophy is from the 1908 race. So the trophy that Erwin won would have been somewhat similar to this, although I don't know exactly what it looks like. That trophy is missing too. The 1911 trophy from Erwin is missing too. Now with this one, there may have been some issues where a member of the family may have, arranged for it to go out of the family, or may have looked the other way, or may have sold it, or whatever the case is. But as I dug deep into this with Lou's help as well, it's conjecture on my part that somebody around here had something to do with this trophy eventually being missing. I don't know how else to say it, but I can't prove anything, but the trophy is out there somewhere. This one, by the way, sold at auction for $157,000 several years ago. So the 1911 trophy would obviously be worth probably more money than that because of its connection to the race and the family and what have you. But to this day, we don't know where the trophy is. I can't imagine that it's lost forever, that it was melted down. Somebody's got it somewhere. So hopefully as time goes on, word will come forward. Next photo, please. All right, this is just a picture of my business card. Let me go to one more section. We'll wrap this up. Questions and answers.
Yeah, that's true.
Let's go through these. All right, so we have a look at where the Bergdoll farm property was here along Westchester Pike. I know it's difficult to see, but as we go through a couple of photos, they'll get a little bigger. This is Darby Creek. Okay, so about in the lower section of that photo is where 476 crosses Westchester Pike, the blue route crosses Westchester Pike and Darby Creek. And you can see that says L. Bergdoll, 26.5 acres. That was the original Bergdoll farm, purchased by Lou's grandfather many years ago. Next photo, please. Here's a bigger map that shows all of Marple Township, and you can see the black line that kind of goes catty corner is Westchester Pike, and by now, I forget which date this is, it might have been 1928. You can see where it's Emma Bergdoll, Charles Bergdoll, and Charles Bergdoll as well. So they own 3 properties on the edge of Darby Creek. Next photo, please. Here's a closer shot of that. Charles Bergdoll has 88 acres on this kind of the southwest, the south side of Westchester Pike. Emma has the main original farm, and then Charles is the one who built that grand mansion, the stone mansion that was out here on Westchester Pike. Next photo, please. This is a larger map of Marple Township, and it's kind of difficult to see, so let's move to the next one, please. So here's an aerial picture. This white thing right down there is today's Lawrence Road at Westchester Pike. So you get your bearings. As you go out Westchester Pike, on the right-hand side, you see this long building that's right here, right up close to Westchester Pike. That was Irwin's machine shop. As you go farther out would be the original Bergdoll homestead. A little farther out, just before the big white patch back off the road, that would be the large Bergdoll mansion that stood into the 1960s. So that gives you an idea where it was. And then on this side is what was originally Charles's farm, and then later Grover bought that farm. By the way, he bought that farm just days before he was drafted into the war, thinking that if he could fill out his draft card as a farmer, he would be let off. But he wasn't. Next photo, please. Here's a better shot of it. And this photo, which was taken a few years after the first one, shows they even built a little landing strip there, which surprised me because I didn't realize they'd ever landed airplanes here, but they obviously did. And again, this is Lawrence Road. Now, it was not in the same line of today's Lawrence Road. It's been changed a few times. Next photo, please. There's a wider shot of it as well. Next photo. Another shot. Okay, so this is later. This is after Westchester Pike is being widened in the 1950s. And you can see how things are gradually changing. Next photo, please. Another view of the same thing. You can see there's an off-ramp for Westchester Pike to get off onto Lawrence Road. Or actually, I'm sorry, that's not an off-ramp. That's the old part of Westchester Pike, which is that straight part. And then you see the 2 lanes of the new Westchester Pike. Next photo, please. There's a much, well, oh, you know what that is? In the V, right here, is Eagle Field. So that is today's Eagle Road and Westchester Pike. So that big open field you see was the Bergdoll Airport, Eagle Field. That's today's Manoa Shopping Center.
Wow.
Next photo, please. And there's an inset of what it looks like today. So 476 and the cloverleaf goes smack through the Bergdoll farm properties. Next one, please. Here's a double shot of it. It kind of puts them together and you can kind of get an idea. You've got Lawrence Road right here in the bottom, Lawrence Road in the bottom. Same picture, but just many, many decades apart. Next photo, and that should be the end of them for this one, this file. Then if you can go back and click on the Bergdoll Farm Photos file. Yes, there we go. Okay, so many of you may recognize this. That's what everybody calls the Bergdoll Mansion on Westchester Pike. At the driver's seat is Lou's father, Irwin. What a dapper gentleman in his bowler cap, his tie, suit on, and then next to him with that distinctive piece of hair that hangs down was Stecker, the family friend who was a mechanic and a bodyguard and a longtime friend of the family. Next photo, please. Here's another shot of the car. Now on the front of the car, in the other picture, if you had zoomed in, you can see where it says Irwin Special, written on the front of the car. So this is a picture of Stecker, and I believe that's Lewis, but I was never sure who that was. And you can see, this is in the driveway, so see the utility poles out there, that would be along Westchester Pike and the trolley tracks. Next photo, please. Here's a shot of the carriage house that was here along Westchester Pike. Next photo. So this is the original Bergdoll farmhouse. This is the farmhouse that Lewis Jr., but he wasn't a true junior, had built. And then many years later, Irwin purchased it. And up back, you can see a barn behind that tree. And when the federal agents got a little too close, Irwin would run from the house out into the barn, and he had a little hidden room out there where he would hide out, and they never found him. He'd be peeking through the cracks in the barn, and they'd be searching around the house and the property. They never found him. Next photo, please. Here's a shot many years later of Lou's parents right there. I don't know what year that would have been. Do you, Lou? No? Good picture. I added color to it.
Late
so
40s maybe?
yeah, maybe late 40s, Lou. Okay, next photo, please. There's another shot of them with one of the cars. Now this is one of the cars that Irwin actually built. He built this car out of all the spare parts that he had. He was a very skilled machinist.
Do any of the cars still exist?
None of the race cars. There are a few people who have collected the Bergdoll touring cars that were built at the factory downtown. None of the race cars that I know.
But they're not on display in any museum?
No.
Probably.
Next photo, please. And there's a shot of the old mansion here along Westchester Pike. What a building. Charles had that built, and he owned a quarry in Reading, near Reading, Pennsylvania, in what's the county that Reading's in? Berks County. He owned a quarry in Berks County, and he had the stone shipped down from his own quarry. And you see on the top it says AD 1907.
Wow.
Just a beautiful, magnificent building. Next photo, please. And there's another shot of the carriage house that was next to the house. Now this was taken when it was put up for sale, sometime in the late 40s. Emma owned it at the time, and when her estate was settled, they sold the house. Next photo, that might be it. No, okay. So here's the new Westchester Pike on the left. This is old Westchester Pike as it goes down into the valley, Darby Creek and Lawrence Road. And then all of this was Grover's land. And that was in dispute for many, many years. And finally in the 1960s, his children sold it for $878,000, something, $870,000. Sizable piece of land. It was about 80 acres at the time, because some land had been taken to build and widen Westchester Pike. Today, where the giant grocery store is, and what do you think it's worth today? It starts with an M, whatever it is. Anyway, next photo, please. And there's Lou's father, Irwin, on the roof of his house here along Westchester Pike. And did we ever determine what he was doing, cleaning the gutters or something like that?
He did his own work.
In a suit. Next photo, please. That might be it. Okay, thank you very much. All right, so Lou, let's invite you to come up here, and if people have any questions, comments, or... Let me point out something. When you saw that picture of Irwin standing on the roof with a stick in his hand, I mean, look at the long legs. It's the same man, right? You agree? Yes, ma'am.
I had also read a previous book too, so
Mhm.
a lot of this information is new and intriguing to me as well. The Fairmount Park Race Course, how long was that?
About 8 miles, a little over 8 miles.
Was it?
Yes.
Just to do one
Yes.
loop was 8 miles?
Yes, it
Do you know
went
what
all
speeds?
along West River
Speeds
Drive.
they got up to?
I think when he won that 1911, I think the average speed was 60 miles an hour. Which doesn't sound like much, but you were basically in a carriage. You know, there was no seatbelts.
I wouldn't have gone 60 in one of those cars. You know, as I point out in the book, a lot of racers were killed in those cars, and they were required to carry their mechanic with them. So the racers had to drive. The racer could not look over his shoulder. The mechanic could. The racer just had to drive, and there were crashes galore, and
Barbed wire,
everything.
fence
No,
posts.
I mean,
And all the people watching were just on the sides too.
And they
Yes.
go out on the course
Yeah.
too.
in one of the races that happened in Syracuse, New York, there was a crash and 9 spectators were killed. So you know what they did? They cleaned everything up, got the bodies out of there, the injured out of there, and they resumed the race. It was a different era. Yes, sir. Right here in the blue.
Personal question. Louis,
Yep.
how old are you?
I'm 69. I was born in 55.
Well, I'm 92, and I used to play in that mansion when I was a little boy.
Oh, really?
All right.
Really?
I was born in Broomall in February of 32.
Oh, that's
My
fascinating.
dad was very good friends, and I don't know which names of Bergdolls he was friends with. But I had a lot of fun there.
Now, was that when the family was still living there or spending summers
They
there?
were still living there.
Mhm. Well, that's fascinating.
Yeah, Emma died
The
in 45.
caretaker was living in a house on this side of Westchester Pike. There was a caretaker with 2 boys. His wife had died. They were living in that house in the 30s. It was on this side of Westchester Pike.
That would have been Grover.
Yeah, I never saw that house when it was whole. I only saw the ruins of that house.
Yeah, it was a very small building, but it was,
Yep.
they were living there. I just told someone earlier, behind that house, where the caretaker lived, there was a spring. Do you remember that spring?
I do not.
Okay.
I remember that big rock in Darby Creek though.
Okay.
Any brothers or sisters?
Me? My older sister has passed. My older sister's in assisted living. I'm sorry. My brother, who was 17 years older than me, died back in 2014. And my youngest sister died in 16, I think it was.
So you're the only one left?
Well, I'm the only one left that's not in assisted living.
Right.
Well, Lou at 69 does not look that age to begin with. And, I mean, look at him. He's a picture of health. Yes, right here, this man.
Yeah, is there any credence to the legend or the stories about the Red Baron being here and taking off and landing, or being taught by the Bergdolls?
Yeah, I don't know about that.
The Red Baron, as in the German airplane?
Yeah, well,
I've never
the
heard.
rumor is that the Red Baron was helped to learn how to fly by one of the Bergdolls.
Yeah.
I've never heard that. There were so many
Stories.
just stories and rumors, and I mean, you could get into a rabbit hole every time you turned a corner.
Right.
One question.
Yes, ma'am.
You said that Grover hid out in Germany in the 30s.
Yes.
How did he evade the Nazis?
He came across the Nazis a few times,
And then he
and
didn't make him go into the army? I mean, like,
right.
they left him alone?
Yeah, for the most part, yes. Now
Oh,
he was in Baden, which the section of Baden that he was in was not heavily infiltrated, and it didn't have a large Nazi presence until much later in the 1930s, 1938 or 39. He did come across the Gestapo a few times. They came by the house where he was living with his wife Berta and questioned them. Searched, the house a few times, but that's a mystery that I never really understood. Now,
They didn't make him go into the army because now we're getting into the war.
no, that would have been an extremely political thing. I also don't think at the time they wanted the publicity that would have come with messing around with Grover.
Because he still had he was still American citizen.
Well, yes, but they were trying to revoke his citizenship.
Right, okay.
Politicians in Washington.
So
He didn't have a passport. When he came back to America in 1939, he used a fake passport, which he threw into the ocean as he was crossing. So that was one of the issues with him trying to get back into the country.
Okay.
Although at one point, the State Department agreed that the consul in Germany would issue him a passport if he were to come back in voluntarily. But that was about 7 or 8 years before he actually did. So, but that's a good question. He evaded
Yeah.
contact with the Nazis
Yeah.
somehow.
Yeah.
But also keep in mind, when he was living in Germany, he was paying everybody. He even rented a deer lease, which is what we know today as a deer lease, vast acreage. He wasn't a hunter, although he had guns. He didn't hunt deer, but he would allow the local police and political officials to go hunting on his deer lease. And so he was paying everybody
Okay, so
to
he was
keep
paying
him
them,
safe,
okay.
yes.
Was the brew?
Question right here,
What year did the government allow him to go out and look for his trade?
That would have been 1920. He was tried and convicted in 1920, and then he was due to be sent by train to Leavenworth. His attorneys convinced the government to allow him to stay at Governor's Island, which had a prison, for a few more weeks so he could visit with his family. And at that time is when they negotiated the agreement to allow him to go hunt for his gold.
And what year did he go to Germany?
Well, soon after that, he fled.
Was he in Germany after 1933?
Yes, yes. Although he came back to the United States a couple of times and stayed here for a lengthy amount of time, hiding in the mansion.
Is there any chance he would have brought the treasure to Europe?
No,
As did
So,
Americans?
you'll have to read the book. All I'll say is that the buried gold was a
A lot of
Think-
money changed.
What was the effect of Prohibition on the brewery, and did the brewery start again after Prohibition?
It closed the brewery, and they tried to reorganize, but my grandmother, the primary business person there, was way up in her years, and I don't know why they never got off the ground, but they never got it off the ground.
Did they have their own label? Was it Bergdoll?
Oh, yeah,
Beer?
yeah, they had their own beer. It was very popular.
What do you,
Next, right here.
I was just gonna say, how old were you when your father passed, and what do you remember about his
I was 10
personality?
years old. I remember he was very quiet. If he didn't like you, you're going to know it. He was a cantankerous old guy, very frank. You know, he'd tell you exactly what was on his mind.
How about right here?
I was just curious about what made you want to write this book and how long it took you to
So
complete it.
I addressed that in the introduction. Lou, by the way, writes the foreword to the book. And he also read the foreword for the audio book, which is being re-released soon, I'm told. So in the introduction, I state how in the early 90s, I was doing a story at the Franklin Institute when I worked for Channel 10. And afterward, I was wandering around and I saw the airplane in the Franklin Institute. And I thought, why is a Wright Brothers airplane here in Philadelphia? Because I'd been to the Smithsonian and I knew the connection with the Wright Brothers and the Smithsonian. And I looked around and there was nothing about it. It just said 1911 Wright Brothers airplane. I thought, why is it here? Whose was it? So I started looking into it, and I kind of, my suspicions kind of said, well, there's a reason why they didn't attribute that airplane to the Bergdolls, because of everything that was going on. So the more I started looking into it, the more I realized there's a wonderful story here. And I did read a book written by a woman who wrote a book about the Bergdolls in the 1970s. A very good book. But in the 1970s, her access to information, as you can imagine, was very limited. In contrast to what I was able to get from Europe, from Canada, all over the country, you name it. So the more I got into it, I'm just like, this is just an incredible story. So, yes, sir.
When was the last year anybody lived in the mansion, and wasn't there a fire after that?
In the mansion here on Westchester Pike? Yeah,
I think it's around 1945.
when a Bergdoll member lived there.
Yeah. My father took care of my mother, and funny story, he felt that the boys, his brothers and his sister, owed him for taking care of his mom, and he wanted the mansion. They wanted $33,000, and he was like, bink, and that's when it left the family.
So what happened after that?
It was sold, and
It was sold, and a
it
woman
went through hands,
rented rooms and rented apartments in it for many years. And she owned it at the time when it burned, and it became vacant for a while, and I think vagrants had gotten in there, and it was a cold night. They
What
started
year was the
fire
fire,
in the basement.
70s or something like that?
70 something, maybe 3 or
No, 77.
77? Okay. There are some amazing pictures. If you go up to the Thunderbird,
I've seen them.
I mean, you see the picture of the flames just engulfing the whole
I
building.
remember that.
Do you? Okay. Right.
Because we lived in Broomall.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out where it was. We're lived up this way, but I didn't.
I knew at this session tonight there would be people who remembered that. I didn't realize that there would be a man who had played in that building back in the 30s, but I knew there would be people who would remember the mansion. Yes, sir, right here.
Do any of the children or grandchildren of Grover survive, and are you in touch with them?
Oh, yeah, there's several of them, and I frankly, I don't have close contact with all of them, some of them. So I don't know how many are left, but they're all getting up in the years.
Grover's youngest daughter, Katarina, lives in Virginia, and she worked very closely with us as well on the information for the book. She was very cooperative and very agreeable, and was
Very nice lady too.
Yes, was
I talked to her on the
Did you?
phone, and you wouldn't know she was an older woman because her voice was so distinguished.
yes, yeah.
So gentle and everything like that. And I even sent a picture. I always refer to it as the famous picture because she's standing on ruins
Yes,
that were basically
right.
on the Blue Route. She's just standing there like seeing what is right before her.
Mhm.
And I asked her to autograph a photo for me, so she had it nicely signed right at the bottom, Katarina. And I said, your autograph is just as gentle as your very voice, very distinguished, very kind, gentle.
Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to tell Louis that those of us who've lived for a very long time, I wanted to know, we still call that Bergdoll Hill.
Yeah, great, I like it.
If you want to tell somebody where it is, well, it's Bergdoll Hill.
Well, I hope it stays like that. Absolutely. Any other questions, comments, or contributions? Yes, sir.
Real quick, I'm just curious. It seems like a Hollywood story, larger than life. I was wondering, has it ever been approached to put it to a screenplay, or have you been approached by anybody to go beyond?
Not yet. I think Lewis could play his own role, though. In the book, there's a picture of him in front of his Uncle Lewis's mansion down on Green Street. And I tell everybody, I say, God, he looks like a rock star. You know, he's got long hair. But no, to answer
He
your
wanted a
question.
photo, and I figured I'd let him have it. I didn't know he was going to use it in the book. I see it in the book, and there's a hole in my jeans. And
But it's a great
being
picture.
an author and a
It's
newsman, I
great
should have
picture.
known that anything went, you know, whatever he's got.
Oh, and one final thing. So, several years ago, God, it's been a long time now, we're sitting in Jack's firehouse having a beer. And I repeat this in the book, and Lou just kind of looked to me and he said, God, I wish I could taste what Bergdoll beer was like as he's sipping a lager. And, you know, I thought, well, you'll never get that opportunity. So, early last year, I had been in contact with a descendant of the Barth family. The matriarch Bergdoll woman, Emma, was originally a Barth. Her name was Barth. And her brother was the general manager of the brewery for many years. The family hired him to run the brewery for many years for the family. And one of the descendants in the Barth family had been in touch with me and been trading stories and what have you. And his great aunt died in Florida. They sent her remains back to Maine, where she grew up, to be buried. And the family all went up to Maine and held the services. So they're showing photographs, and in one of the photo albums is a recipe for Bergdoll beer. So just before the book was to go to the publisher, he sent it to me. And in one of those stop the presses kind of moments, I called the publisher, which is here in Abertown, and I said, we have to include this. So I got his permission, he signed off on using the recipe. And although it's a simple draft beer, lager beer recipe, and for a small batch, it was written by Mr. Barth, the man who ran the brewery for almost 40 years. and we were able to put it in the book.
So have you made it yet though? Because in Evertown, there's a place that supplies.
I have. I mean, it's such a standard, basic recipe. Anybody could make it, but it was just kind of neat, and it's in his longhand. It's written on a notebook paper and longhand. It was just kind of neat to be able to put that in the book. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Two more, a question and a comment. Any of the cars that, not necessarily the race cars, but any of the cars that used to be part of the Bergdoll Car Company, are you aware of any of them in any of the historical circles?
I'm aware of
in
where
the area?
some went.
I'm sorry?
I'm aware of where some of them went,
Right.
and there's interesting stories about some of those too. But there's only 2 Bergdoll made cars. One's in southern PA. I know the guy, and there's one in Magnolia, supposedly Magnolia, New Jersey, that's in a storage trailer. And I think that one's in danger of being turned into a Mercer, which was made in New Jersey, a race car.
Okay.
I think it's in danger of being turned into a Mercer because Mercers are worth about $1 million. They want to use the parts,
When
but
you
that's
say-
just hearsay.
Okay. When you say southern PA, what do you mean?
I've never been to the guy's house, so I'm not positive. But
He lives on the Delaware kind of state line with Chester County.
I was thinking around
All right.
New London.
Yeah, it's almost it's right in that little corner with Maryland, Delaware, and Chester
Okay.
County come together.
Not who I'm thinking. I'm thinking of somebody out in Skippack that number of people there. And then, can I ask you one question? What have you done with your life? Have you done anything with the name or anything
I have
of
done
interest?
nothing with the name, although I've been encouraged. My
Okay.
brother-in-law wanted to exploit the name, and he's like, everybody else used it. Why don't we use it? And I figured it had suffered enough. So I kind of poo-pooed that idea.
Here's my take on that, and I describe this a little bit in the end of the book. I say, this is an entirely different generation. Lou, his cousins, they had nothing to do with anything that happened back then. What happened then was an entirely different time,
Absolutely.
both economically, politically, legally, everything was entirely different, and probably would not happen the same way today if things had happened. It couldn't have happened.
You can't shoot at
Yes.
cops.
So today's Bergdoll family, it has nothing to do with what happened then. And from what I've seen, those who were left are respectable, law-abiding citizens of the country. So
Keep going.
So for people today to say, oh, that was the Bergdolls, well, I disagree with that. I think, yes, that happened. It was a different time, a different place. But I just think it's a wonderful story. It's an example of our times and how they've changed over the years.
Wild story.
Yeah. Thank you all very much.